Welcome to Responsible AI in Action. I'm your host, Charles Dimov, CMO of Kama AI, the leader in responsible AI technology. With me today is Zain Nayani, founder and principal of ZN Advisory, a social purpose advisory firm based on the unceded territories of the coast of Salish peoples. Zain works closely with Indigenous governments to translate long-term community visions into actionable, resilient plans. These support strategic development, implementation, and capacity building. His focus is on values-driven planning, sustainable governance, and the responsible use of emerging technologies. That includes AI, which makes Zain an important voice in how communities can adopt these tools safely and meaningfully. So with that, welcome, Zain. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Charles.
Zain, why don't we jump right in? And I'm going to start, I'll ask you a couple of different questions here. So the first question that I've got for you is, you work pretty closely with communities, especially rural communities, Indigenous ones, where you have mentioned to me actually in the past, because we've chatted, that sometimes technology adoption can be a little bit on the slower side. So what are the major barriers that you see with AI adoption, for example? Do you think that maybe responsible AI systems can maybe overcome some of these hurdles? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, no, I think there's two parts to that question, right? You've got the key barriers. What are those? So let's just talk about that. And then we can talk about how a responsible AI can play that role that you're thinking about. In terms of the key barriers, I think the number one that comes to mind when I think about rural communities is often the capacity and infrastructure issues, right? Like the constraints. You've got limited IT people serving in the regions. There's always hit and miss connectivity. You've got so many different operational priorities going on that AI projects or pilots, they compete with time, energy, and resources. So how do you manage that part? That's a key barrier. Then you've got data sovereignty and trust issues, right? Again, communities ask who's owning the data, who's controlling the data, who's got the access to the data, who's got the possession, right? So who possesses the data, OCAP principles. So again, that often comes up as a key barrier to advancing into AI projects. But then you've also got things like cultural safety representation. You've got all these tools that can misinterpret. And we know that part from our own experiences that, AI is, there's a little line at the bottom often that says AI results could be incorrect, right? So always checking, running it by people, just making sure that it's human led, but there is that issue around cultural safety and representation. And there's often, when you talk to people in communities, there's environmental concern, right? Like the cumulative effects on land, water, energy, those things. Like what people think about that when I talk in Indigenous communities in a rural context, those are kind of key barriers, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah, it does. And I like that you kind of brought that up. You're absolutely right. In fact, I think we're hearing more and more about this on a daily basis, that, a lot of the large language models, when it's just the LLMs kind of driving the answers to whatever your questions are as a user, there's enormous amounts of energy that goes into it, enormous amounts of water consumption to cool down the system. So you're absolutely right. I mean, I think the world does need some alternatives. Let's put it that way. Alternatives that might be a little bit more efficient, that might be more conservative, and or at the very least are very focused on that. So that's good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Now, when you're working with Indigenous communities specifically, what are some of the concerns that you hear coming up when they're thinking about bringing in AI technologies? And you mentioned a couple already, so certainly there's the environmental concerns. Are there any others that kind of make them a little bit reticent to say, oh, I don't know whether we should be doing this?
Well, no, I think those are the biggest concerns that I can think of that almost come up at every conversation you want to have. What's the impact on land? What's the impact on water? What's the impact on energy needs, right? When deploying this technology, data ownership, control, access, again, that OCAP principles, right? Like how do you apply that? making sure that things are being led by people, right? Particularly elders in the community, right? Like that cultural
Mhm.
sensitivity piece, the cultural voice piece, the protocols in the community, right? Making sure that it's done in an orderly fashion, right? There are rules that are being applied to that, and then the reliability, accuracy, right? Like looking at it from a very, I guess, critical perspective, critical thinking perspective, and making sure
Mm.
that what it's throwing back at you is is reliable, is accurate. You can actually verify that against
Yes.
certain facts, figures, right? In your visions, in your plans, be it financials or non-financial plans. Again, there is
Yes.
a lot of potential. Just and I'm not an expert in AI in any way or shape, but
Huh?
I do use it as a tool, and I want to
Yeah.
continue to learn, this really cool technology that is much like internet, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Mm.
it's just exploded, and there's an awesome
Mm.
opportunity for local grassroots to solve local problems, right? And that requires taking that championship, that human-led, community-led approach to getting things done, be it AI or be it something else, doesn't really matter.
Yes. Nice. Yes. Yes. I do agree. Actually, and it's good that you brought up the elders, for example, and the because rural and community councils, they often have these amazingly long-term visions.
Mm,
Actually, I was chatting with Brian, the CEO of Kama as well, and
yeah,
he's talked to me about the visions that will span 7 generations, for
yeah,
example. And that's amazing. That's fantastic. That it's really long-term planning to think,
yeah.
hey, you know what? How do we do things so that yeah, our children's, our grandchildren, et cetera, have a sustainable, livelihood and life and environment and such. So I love that aspect. Now, tell me, in that context, how do you think AI can actually help to translate those 50 to 400-year community visions into real plans with real actions and measurable progress and such?
Yeah, I think there's one thing that I did not mention in the previous comment was, the potential around project management, and that's precisely what you're talking about, right? So
Hmm.
making sure that you're curating that knowledge base, right? Like just having a certain directory of approved plans, articles that make sense to your community. Start even by throwing your vision into an AI bot as an example, and start working towards the objectives, the plans, the actions, the timelines, using it from a purely project management perspective, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
Adding details around what are those outcomes that you need as a community, right? Like you create that plan, well, feed it that information, understand, what are those concrete steps, those smart goals that one can create in their day-to-day work, on a quarterly basis, on a biannual basis, on an annual basis. So it starts connecting those dots, right? But you have to curate it. You have to make sure that it's done in a responsible way. You have to make sure that
Mm-hmm.
it's, again, a human-led process, right? And you make sure that it's designed for generations as well, right? Like if you're applying that human-led approach, how do you start thinking about, the KPIs down the road, for a community? And then I think the big thing is also the succession planning. You've got
Yes.
if you've got leadership being changed, if you've got management being changed, staff turnovers are happening, or if you've used it in a neat way, in an organized way, well, that's knowledge stays there, right? You don't have to reinvent.
Mm.
So you can be creative, but the key is that you need to learn. You need to learn, you
Yeah.
need to educate yourself about what are the potentials. I use it, but I also know that it's time consuming, right? To
Mm-hmm.
to to learn
Mm-hmm.
something new. And the
Mm-hmm.
older you get, the harder it gets, I guess, right? I don't know. But I'm,
Yeah.
I'm I'm still in that learning phase where I don't think I used it to its full potential. And then I know that I'm a little bit technologically advanced, but there are people in communities who don't have that digital literacy, a gap that still exists, right? In many communities. So how do they use something like AI, which is a relatively newer technology? How do you get to that place, right? And that's where education, that's where learning, that's where showcasing, do screen shares in community workshops, do one-on-one coaching sessions with your staff, and share screens in that, do SOPs, right? Like have screenshots built into that. This tremendous potential, nothing but potential when it comes to technology like AI, as long as it solves problems, right? Like local
Yeah.
problems, regional problems, global problems. Why wouldn't we? I would love to use it,
Yeah.
for education purpose, healthcare. Does it have problem-solving ability through critical thinking from a human-led process to solve crises like climate change? This
Yeah,
potential,
interesting.
right?
And you kind of touched on some of the aspects of communication as well. So kind of staying true to the voice. And in actually having worked on some other projects, I've heard that come up as a bit of a theme from time to time. The idea about the not wanting the voice and the stories to change, being very true to the fidelity of those things, which is an important aspect to think about as well. So in that regard, do you think that there are safeguards that we need to put in place in the AI to really kind of make sure that the AI, when it's asked a question about a particular community or a particular incident or time, et cetera, that it reflects that community identity, I don't know, with high fidelity or very faithfully?
Mhm.
Because we all know that if you just go onto any standard AI, it has hallucination problems, or it might kind of go out and span everything, and it doesn't have the judgment to say, "Hey, I know that this is a good site versus a bad site. I know that this information is accurate versus this other information is it's not." What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it goes back to when I think of AI or any technology, community needs to be at the center of it, right? It needs to be a community controlled process, which is primarily that knowledge base, right? Where what information do we want the technology to have access to? Those sources need to be approved. You need to make sure that you've done your thinking around what's sensitive and what's not sensitive information.
Mm-hmm.
And making sure that information stays in places that are approved by the community, right? Like is it Copilot? Is it ChatGPT? Is it something else? There's so many different things. So going back to those OCAP principles, ownership, control, access, and possession, right? Like applying that lens. Then also thinking about how do we want to use AI. What's that style? What's that? How do we want to guide our work, right? If you're thinking about AI, well, do we want to use it to educate people about our culture, about our history,
Hmm.
about places in our traditional territories? Are we thinking about language revitalization with our young kids, with younger population, with the wider world? There's heritage benefits there. So really educating. Um, People in a good organized kind of way. Then also that human aspect, right? Making sure that the problems that are coming, like the communication piece, is always vetted by a person, and that's real. It's
Yeah.
someone's job, whether it's an elder, an assigned elder, could
Yeah.
be someone who's truly
Yeah.
interested in AI as a champion, right? And be that knowledge person. Or it could be someone else in the community who vets that information that goes into any sort of system. And then I think the last piece that comes to mind is, can
Mm.
the information be audited if it's needed, like the
Mhm.
auditability aspect of it,
Right.
because you want
Right.
to be able to trace your steps back if community questions, prompts come up, and you have to make sense of it, right? Like that's again, leaving AI on its own and asking it to do certain things without really providing context, without really providing good commands, it can blow up, right? And it can blow
Yeah.
up. It can lead to dangerous things, which you don't want to encourage in a local setting. So going back to that idea of educating, right? Educating
Yes.
and applying the technology to in a way that's local, that's community-led, that focuses on generations, not just today
Yeah.
and tomorrow. So
Yeah.
those would be ways I can think where you
So
don't change the
I
story.
like I like what you said about the effectively human in the loop, right? So making sure that you've got to have people kind of looking through the information that's there to make sure that, again, I'll come back to that fidelity idea that it's actually true to what we meant it to say and stuff, testing it out and things. So that's an important element. I mean, at the end of the day, humans bring judgment, honestly, and that's pretty important, right? To say, yeah, that's not exactly what we meant, or that's not exactly accurate, or no, this is really, really good, and that's awesome. So, in other words, and that accountability that you kind of mentioned as well. So, in that regard, also, and then touching on the aspect that you were talking about regarding education. So, education is pretty central to responsible AI, the adoption, so that people actually start taking it on and using it and leveraging it for what it is, which is it can be a very powerful tool for good for helping us kind of advance for you know uh, lots of different good purposes to AI. So how do you think that training element should what type what do we have to think about in terms of programs both for the younger and the older generation in terms of the AI use so that they have the confidence to say, yeah, this is a really good system, it's ethical, it's good, it's reflecting our culture, our community.
Yeah, I think things like train the trainer, I think that would be a good way to do things. You start at the top. Leader, like community obviously needs to buy in, give you the social licensing to apply, to deploy this technology openly, transparently, in a fair way. Councils, leadership, they need to lead the way in many ways, encourage their managers, encourage their staff to use it. And then at the management level, I think that's where real magic happens because now you're meeting with staff on a day-to-day basis, on a one-on-one basis. There's coaching opportunities in those discussions. And you can also have like those, bring in AI experts to do basic AI courses, right? Like, how do you
Mm-hmm.
do prompts? There are organizations like the First Nation Technology Council, which provide education, that capacity building. They've got awesome partnerships. You guys at Kama, you do things like that. So bringing in those sorts of workshops at a local level again, and talking and showing people, the technology through screen shares again. That's the part that I really think leads to that education, to that learning. And that's a very, again, human-led part, right? But you can also make this a bit more, what do you call it, asynchronous, right?
Hmm.
Where you can have like bots on community websites or project websites. If you've got like, let's say a comprehensive community plan out there, you create a bot around educating people on the progress of that plan. Because these are plans that are years, more than 5 years thinking, that long-term thinking. So, but how do you create a bot and feed it the right information through curated knowledge bases to report back to the community
Yeah.
who's
Yeah.
interested in
Yeah.
learning through that way. So again, it's an asynchronous way, but that it's there. It's an option, right?
Hmm.
That exists. So I guess that's what comes to my mind. But I think in all of this, the key thing is to have boundaries, that lead to good governance of AI,
Right.
right? As a tool.
Right.
It needs to be done in an open way. You need to involve people within the organizations to design how you want to use it, put controls around what's okay, what's not okay, what's non-negotiables. Have that
Yeah.
list, I think. And it is something that I aspire to do with my team, in my company. But again,
Yeah.
it's just one of those things, right? Is it really a priority? This whole AI thing. I think it is one of the things that all organizations, need to embrace and use it to their advantage. So, how fast can you get on it?
Yeah, excellent. All right. Well, that's good. That is really something to be thinking about in terms of the making sure that if you're an organization kind of rolling out systems like this, whether you're indigenous or whether you're rural community or urban, it doesn't really matter that you really do need boundaries as well. Because every organization is looking to either keep true to the faith of what their message is or the information they're conveying or their community or their brand even, right? So
Yeah.
that's good. Very good. That's excellent perspective. Zain, thank you so much for this fascinating discussion about the importance of good AI technology and practices and how it impacts Indigenous communities today. Zain Nayani is the CEO and founder of ZN Advisory, focused on empowering Indigenous governments with strategic planning, implementation support, and responsible technology adoption to help transform long-term community visions into practical, resilient action through focus on financial stewardship. And with that, this is a wrap of another episode of Responsible AI in Action. In each conversation, we sit down with leaders across the AI space, like Zain, to talk candidly about what's really happening in the industry, the latest developments, the challenges teams are facing, and the practical solutions that actually work today. We keep these discussions focused and to the point, typically about 15 to 20-minute formats. And again, thank you, our audience, for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you again on the next episode of Responsible AI in Action.